Welcome to the Lost Signals discusses philosophy, narrative, and the mechanics of criticism. In this show, we analyze the greatest minds of narratology, both classic and current. Enjoy. Hello. So, tonight on The Lost Signals discusses philosophy and narrative, we are sort of doing a follow-up episode to Edgar Allan Poe's Eureka.
A general tie-in, we'll call it.
We're going to be discussing Voltaire's Micromegas, if that is how it's pronounced.
Micromegas.
I'm Jonathan Ian Manser, and I'm having pancakes in the Age of Enlightenment. Here with Stephen Ramosi.
How you doing? We're here to talk about Voltaire.
And Scott Thurlow.
Voltaire ain't got nothing on me, motherfucker.
So the reason we decided to follow this up with Micromegas is that I think they're attempting to achieve similar outcomes.
In a very broad sense, yes.
For those of you who didn't see the previous episode,
Watch it.
Eureka was Poe's attempt to discuss physics and metaphysics in a very formal academic way, but still using narrative. And this work, very much like all of Voltaire, is almost strict narrative to discuss ideas.
Yeah.
And also to take a piss out of...
And to mock everybody that he disagrees with and dislikes at the time, of course, as always.
So, Scott, would you like to give a brief overview of Micromegas?
I shall try. So the framework is Micromegas is himself a celestial being from near and around inhabiting the star Sirius. So he's called the Sirian. And he sort of travels the cosmos, philosophizing and meeting other entities and so forth. He meets a fellow academic philosopher on Saturn who is a dwarf compared to him. So therefore, he is thenceforth referred to as a dwarf, even though they are both, like, again, titanically huge. Mm-hmm. And they travel around sort of, trying to discuss various concepts and ideas around the cosmos. And of course, eventually they stumble into Earth and at first think it's uninhabited, and then eventually discover that humans indeed inhabit it and they are conscious beings and have their own ideas about what it means to be alive and so forth, and about the universe and their place in it. And they have a conversation and then they leave Earth, more or less. Like, it's more, again, as you said, it's sort of like almost even the preface that we have of this article notes that it's very Swiftian. Like it's a Gulliver's Travels kind of a thing. So, like, it's framed around that. But they had discussions, again, like I said, about those, the sort of philosophical chestnuts, as you will, in the light of how Voltaire, like, normally does it. And you could probably tell us more about that, E. But that's pretty much it. So that's, like, again, the framework, and that's the quote-unquote narrative of it. But a lot of it, like, just not devolves, but the narrative then sort of naturally morphs into a discussion about philosophy in some way, shape, or form. Or
more so, like Plato's works, where it's
exactly
someone poses a theory, and then the perfect, instead of Socrates here, the perfect Syrian, has the answers and laughs at anyone giving what Voltaire thinks are improper answers.
Exactly.
But I think one of the very interesting parts of this work is a discussion of perception, where the Syrian has traveled the cosmos and has discovered that everyone, no matter how long they live, how short their lifespans, is not happy with how their lifespan. Sure. And that, like, for instance, when he comes to Earth, humans have a very human-centric view of the world.
Of course.
And so, actually,
I think it's sort of Voltaire's ironic point.
It's absolutely what you're pointing out, is that there are greater things in the world than you can, and to have such a myopic view of things is detrimental to actually doing proper philosophy.
Yeah.
And I actually, as a quick caveat, I believe this is not the first work that has had extraterrestrials in it. But I believe this is the first work that had extraterrestrials who were more intelligent and better than humans were.
More rounded, sure.
which is an interesting fact. Although I don't think he was ever making a claim about.
Right. It wasn't taking that as fact.
It was more a point of discussing perception.
Exactly, and perspectives of view.
So I think that's interesting that you took his. You took this to be entirely or almost entirely about it's like making fun of human philosophy or something like that.
He's pro Locke in this.
So yeah, but I think that what I got from it was that things are the same all over, really.
Mm-hmm.
You get the Syrian. He complains about the same things as the Saturnian, who complains about the same things as the Earthicans, as I'm going to call them. And despite the fact that they have different heights,
senses,
age limits, senses. They all kind of live the same type of life, and I think that yes, they both laugh at the one Aquinas, the guy that espouses the Aquinas philosophy.
Mm-hmm.
They both laugh heartily at him, but I think they listen interestedly enough to the rest of them,
to the other viewpoints,
and kind of see all of these things. I think the one thing that differs that really differs between all of their societies is that people from Earth are way more warlike than they seem to be.
Sure, there's a big section about that.
That's the only thing that they're confused about, is why this one person would be waging war. This one guy would be waging war against this other guy and killing all these people for seemingly just a spot of mud, I think they call it, or something like that. But I think that it seemed to me that the overall message of this story was that no matter where you're from, things are basically people or beings are basically the same,
But I don't think that our points that we're making are can't coexist, because I think part of his thing of that the myopic viewpoint of several members of humanity, and I'm going to jump back to the beginning for a second, when he's discussing basically himself as Voltaire going to school and being,
yes.
but as Micromegas, the Jesuit teachers not liking what philosophy he had. I think his point of view is that we're all, whether you're in Germany or whether you're in China, I think it was a point he makes. One empire is much bigger than the other. However, we're the same type of people. Just say that my group is special because
of X or whatever,
X or Y. No, everyone is the same. Whether we're
all trapped in this consciousness together.
Exactly,
and that's what I kind of love about this story, because that's not a viewpoint that you're going to find very often at that time,
or even now.
That people are people. I would say you'll probably find it more in writing now than you would have then.
Sure. I mean, I would agree with that, of course, but in a larger context, I think that it is a really interesting take on the philosophy of people, regardless of what your status is, right? You find a similar philosophy and a similarly complex philosophy in the smallest of people in this story. Perhaps that is discussing the status of people or whatever that is supposed to be a metaphor for specifically in this. I'm sure there is something that is specifically a metaphor for. I just didn't see it in the liner notes, and I'm not exactly sure what was going on with Voltaire at the time. But to an extent, it doesn't really matter who exactly this is talking about. What does matter is the overall message, I think.
So you're right about that. And I want to bring up whales for a second.
Let's talk about whales.
and this is it's
because whales.
Empiricism and whales, actually, because the Saturnalian, whatever it is, the dwarf, when it comes down to Earth, spots a whale as the only species they can see.
Yeah.
And assumes that it's a entire planet populated by whales.
It's like a tick to them, yeah.
And I think they left thinking that whales still are the highest species in. But the idea of that, just because you have an observation that you make,
right?
And I think this is him speaking to science at the time. Doesn't mean that there are greater or smaller things in your perception.
Just because you can see something doesn't mean there's something you can't see operating beneath the surface, right?
Exactly, and I'm going to tie it in. I have in my notes, like, one of the things he's getting at least that I found and saw, is that judging by preconceived appearances and notions, of course, like, is something he's trying to point out that happens and think about and sort of, if not combat it, but realize that that's often how viewpoints are formed, and therefore that we should be aware that that is an aspect of when you're trying to, like, to break away from the human-centered, at least the myopic vision of whatever your viewpoint and philosophy may be.
I'm going to slightly knock Voltaire, I think, at the
sure, make fun of a dead guy.
Sizes that he put people, his view of their vision, like either they had really shitty eyes or at least the Saturnian could have seen people pretty well, I think. Yeah, he wasn't that big.
Man, you'd have nitpicked the fucking
None of them were so big that they couldn't see fucking people.
They could cross the entire globe in
it was
32 hours.
Yeah. Okay. How long would it take a person across the globe?
Walking?
I don't know if this is pertinent.
Yes. Let's figure this out right now. Walking. Let's call it 1,000 hours. Probably more than that. Let's call it 5,000 hours.
I think you're looking at a very specific viewpoint, which I think is what we're trying to break away from.
And I don't think the size really particularly matters. It's
regardless
more perception. But I must say, it's the final real point I have about this, and whatever you guys want to talk about afterwards, cool. I really like his chastising of those who study Aristotle, where the Syrian says, "Sorry, my Greek's not Greek. My great, and,
my Greek's not great. Yeah, neither is mine."
Thus, when we're talking about problems that we don't understand, the best thing to do is to talk about the language we at least understand.
Yeah, I had that line picked out too. I thought it was amazing. Like, again, because the nature of this is, in Voltaire in general, like, often satirical and, like, based on parody and so forth, regardless of what targets he's was specifically targeting at the time when he was alive. But things like that are, like, more broadly applicable because it's like sort of like a vague cop-out defense that any philosopher or any, like, person who's thinking about issues like this could take.
Yeah.
So it was a dig at that, and yes, it was funny, and I like that it was included there at the very end.
All right, so do any of you have further thoughts you want to discuss on this in particular?
Like, nothing in particular. Like, I just have a couple of things, again, that we, if not glossed over, that we didn't quite mention earlier, but things like, on top of everything he did point out that we just talked about, he points out, like, the absurdity of war. One of you mentioned, like, how humanity is more, like, belligerent towards each other than they have apparently found, and are sort of, like, taken aback by that. Like, things like that, like, but overall, like, I did want to say this. When I was reading it, I mentioned to you guys, precast, that I sort of had a Flatland kind of a feel to it as well, which I believe Flatland was written a little bit after this, not in the time of Voltaire, like, right? You tell me if I'm accurate about that.
I know.
I'm not sure
Flatland was 1800.
Right, and this was like 1740s,
50s. 17, something like that.
17... I think the author said...
The date's there somewhere.
The translator said somewhere between like 1700 and 1750.
Yeah, it's
like that.
It's some kind of date
it was
range
a
like
wide
that. Anyway, it doesn't
possibility.
matter.
Anyway.
That doesn't matter necessarily. But I'm just saying, I got a kind of a Flatland kind of a vibe.
Yeah.
With what he was going for, like trying to use that again, like that general narrative framework as a vehicle to convey and have a conversation and put forth his like various ideas and so forth.
Also,
so that's all.
I don't want to talk about aliens, but let's talk about aliens.
Okay.
You briefly mentioned this earlier, Ian, but I think it's a really interesting thing. Is like this is kind of the first time that aliens are brought into the intelligent aliens are brought in the forefront of literature,
philosophical discussions, yes.
And it's in the 1700s, right? So this is pre H.G. Wells.
Yeah.
This is pre Mary Shelley, which Frankenstein is often thought of as the first, sci-fi book, right? Like, this is a work that talks about things that weren't a thing yet, right? Like this is the precursor to science fiction.
Okay, I'm going to go into this for pretty in depth for a moment.
Please.
All right, because I studied Voltaire quite a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So when Voltaire was born, and a lot of his early works deal with this concept called optimism. And the thing is, this is the best of all possible worlds because God created this world. He wouldn't have given us anything besides the best. If a misfortune happens to you, there's some kind of mysterious plan there that it will benefit you in the long run because God would not allow misfortune to fall upon you. Now, and you had like Newton and Leibniz who were saying that mathematics could prove the existence of God, and you see God appear.
He just mentioned both of those.
The issue is that as it goes on, Voltaire, a smart guy who was partly a playwright, partly a satirist, and partly attempting to become an actual academic, became more and more bitter with his world. He has a great work called Plato's Dream, which involves all of the Greek gods getting together to create the worlds.
Yeah.
And he's like, well, yes, God himself could be a good being who would make a perfect thing, but maybe he subcontracted the design of worlds. Yeah. Now, what if we got the Demogorgon? Use that first. I should have Stranger Things.
Yeah. Good Stranger Things tie-in.
Yeah. The Demogorgon created the Earth, and yes, it's the best of all possible worlds that the Demogorgon could have made. But more so, Voltaire was getting into the mindset that being human kind of sucks. Being alive kind of sucks. Like, how can I rationalize a good God with this world? So here he's saying that, well, just because we exist on anything, we think we're the best, doesn't mean that there can't be other planets out there with creatures greater than us. And I think that it was the right circumstance with a lot of terrible things, such as the earthquake in Portugal, I believe it was, that killed ungodly amount of people, and that really broke Voltaire in a lot of ways, saying like there is no God here. Like how he would not have let this happen. He started to move more away from us being perfect creatures to maybe there's things better out there, and that's where I think aliens then come in as a demonstration of
a possibility of that. Sure.
So sorry for that little bit of rant.
I'm not saying it's Demogorgon, but
like I said, okay, yeah, change it to that. But no, like you are certainly the resident, like sort of Voltaire expert, and again, it's interesting to know that the circumstances of his experience in life, like of course, are going to inform what he wrote and when he wrote it. Yeah. So, given that, I think you can certainly see it, at least aspects of it,
he was exiled all the time, like
standard. He was on standard exile.
The woman he loved, who was his mistress, died, giving birth to another man's child. Like, a lot of terrible things happened to Voltaire, which made him incredibly bitter, and some of the best work I've read.
He was the Bukowski of the...
That's absolutely true.
That's a good call.
In the Age of Enlightenment.
He was a bitter son of a bitch who was had a rapier wit.
Sure. But no, I mean, I don't have much more to say other than like it's a nice kind of quick read, and it's interesting to go like you can pick out the things that we just talked about and see them there, and see like how this person of this stature did it at the time, and knowing what was known, and sort of again thought experimenting the rest of it.
Just go read about a really big guy talking to a slightly smaller guy talking to some much smaller guys.
In the hills, the cities, Voltaire. That's a deep pull.
Wow.
That's all I got.
All right, so now into the topic I actually want to discuss tonight.
Go on.
Is bring in Eureka.
Okay.
So, Steve-O, you mentioned a couple of things pre-cast about this.
Did I?
What is the difference between Eureka and Micromegas that you feel?
I think it's interesting. I think they're like almost opposites in the way that they treat their subject matter, right? Like Poe is a storyteller. I mean, not that Voltaire isn't, but Poe is a storyteller who uses almost an academic / article style to talk about his metaphysics, whereas Voltaire uses a story,
a somewhat whimsical
to talk about his philosophy, framework. I would say. So yeah, I would say that this is much more narrative in structure. It's more of a story than a I don't know what the correct word is. I'm at a loss for the right word, but like the
sort of journal article almost.
A thesis almost?
Yeah. Almost thesis like breakdown that Poe does in Eureka, which was very strange to read from Poe because you're used to having him
sure, it's a pretty radical
talk
switch.
about things in a narrative style.
So what's interesting to me is Voltaire is respected as a great thinker. Mm-hmm. Poe is to a certain extent, but I think Poe is always more established for writing. And when he attempted to,
he's more of a storyteller than a thinker. One would say,
right? So, like that's what I was going to segue into because of the very thing you just said. Poe built his reputation on being a storyteller, right? So and not being a quote unquote more thinker / philosopher.
But theoretically, so did Voltaire. Voltaire was just more.
Yeah, but
outright
more
with
obvious.
His philosophical leanings.
Right, that's what I'm saying. So I think that might be the sort of the divide, or at least the divide that was sort of created in respectability between the two works, if you will, because one of the authors didn't come from that world, if you will, whereas Voltaire did come from a general world of philosophizing and academia education, and sort of versus just being sort of a macabre storyteller, which was what Edgar Allan Poe was like. If you strip it down, that's probably what he's most famous for. So that might be possibly sort of the genesis of why one work is more respected than the other, even though they're both more or less attempting the same thing. Sure, as you said, Steve-O, from different vehicles, but nevertheless, broadly, I think they're under the same banner.
So I'm a big fan of Kurt Vonnegut, and he's a great thinker as well.
Yeah.
Made a number of interesting points. And perhaps, like, Voltaire can be compared a little bit to that. They kept in their lane, if you will.
Yeah. I see what you mean.
Using satire to bring points. Perhaps, I'm going to try to... If Poe had taken Eureka and had stripped all... and made it, formed a narrative out of it, would it be more respected today?
I mean...
I think so.
You can't really answer that to be... what do I think?
What do you think? No, we're not saying. I mean, would it is? Tell me for sure. What is the fact of the matter?
I think it probably has better of a chance of being that. Yes, I'll agree with that. Again, because of what we all just said, that if he had formed it, like I guess I'll say this, like a form that people were more comfortable with, versus such a radical shift from his previous styles, then yeah, probably it would have been maybe like more accepted. It would have been easier for people to like sort of take it in. But because it's so sharply divided in that sense, that's probably why it sort of takes more flack, I guess I'll say, than it possibly should or deserves. So yeah, I would generally agree with that. It would probably be the case if that were true.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it would. I mean, I don't have too much more to say, but like I think that if Poe had made his Eureka into a story as opposed to a general...
More of a journal article, physics article.
Yeah, expression of his random thoughts about metaphysics, I think that it would have been more accepted. And not to say that it would have made any different points. He could have made all the same points and made it a story, and I think that people would have liked it more. Just because he gave people something they weren't expecting. And for better or for worse, people expect things out of artists or authors or whatever that have been making work for a long time that are, fairly popular.
In one specific way.
Yeah.
More or less. Sure. I'll agree with that.
I think this has been an interesting discussion over the fact that if you are an author out there in the listening viewership of us, and you are considering writing academic papers, don't.
I'm not saying that.
No, I say be a satirist.
Follow
instead.
your heart. Follow your heart. Do whatever you want to do.
Challenge.
Maybe Einstein will say that your shit is awesome, like he did about Eureka.
Yeah, but no one really cares what Einstein had to say.
Yeah, nobody cares about Einstein. Who cares about that guy?
You should go out there and just challenge every other person and tell them using straw man argument why they're wrong.
Yeah, that's pretty. I'm pretty sure that's what Voltaire was trying to say.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right. So, any other final thoughts?
Nah.
Nah.
Not really. I think we covered a lot of ground.
So. Yeah. This was a quick discussion that covered a lot.
Much like Voltaire's.
I enjoyed reading Micromegas. It was. I actually read a Wikipedia article about it before I read it, and the first thing it says on Wikipedia is this novella, and I was like, novella? Holy shit! How long is this going to be? It's like 9 pages long. It's not a novella at all.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are chapters,
we can quibble over.
I think perhaps it's a novelette.
Yes.
It's all a matter of perspective,
but
as Voltaire might say.
It's good. It's an interesting story, and it's well worth a read to see. What Voltaire's prevailing philosophy was at that point.
At that one point in his life.
That one point in his life.
I recommend the Candide, which is perhaps his best work.
And most bitter.
Oh, yes. Oh yes. But this is pretty good.
This is pretty bitter.
I liked it overall, and I think it has some really interesting points. And again, I recommend it over Eureka. By far.
It's a tough call. Yeah. It's going to be close to me, like 55-45.
Well,
split.
It's certainly much shorter. So
if you're
looking for a quick read Voltaire. If you're looking for a long read, I mean, they're different things too.
Sure.
As much they have some things in common, but they're not about the same thing at all.
They're a family of resemblances.
Yeah.
Which I haven't brought up in a while.
Anyway. Now you have.
I'm Jonathan Emanzer, here with Stephen Ramosi.
I'm here with my family of resemblances, and I'll see you later.
And Scott Thurlow.
Forget Saturn, forget Sirius, Mars forever. See you next time.
Thank you for listening to The Lost Signals Discusses Philosophy, Narrative, and the Mechanics of Criticism. Editing and engineering by Jonathan E. Manzer. Music by Christopher Morgan. Check us out on YouTube and iTunes for the shows, and on Facebook and Twitter for updates.